So today is absolutely the best time to buy a C200. I know this isn't the C200, it's the C100. They're practically the same camera design-wise. So let's just pretend this is the C200 today. For the longest time, the C200 was a solid camera in Canon C-series lineup that just wasn't quite worth the price it retailed for. Coming into the scene at a whopping $7,499, this camera was just out of many filmmakers' price range, especially with many cheaper options out. But now that the price has dropped to $3,499, finally dropped to a price point where it's worthy of its specs. While there are many mirrorless cameras that can match the basic specs of this camera, there aren't many cinema cameras that can, and this is why this camera stands out. If you watch my channel for a while, you know that I'm obsessed with cinema cameras, and I've talked about my 6-year-old C100 for years now. But seriously, the shooting experience I've had with this camera has been better than any of the cameras that I've owned in the past, even cameras that outdo this camera in specs. The biggest advantage cinema cameras give are the myriad of built-in features such as ND filters, zebras, focus peaking, SDI and HDMI outputs, and XLR ports. These make filmmaking a breeze and don't require you to buy a lot of extra accessories like other cameras do. Also, the ergonomics are typically really good with these cameras, which makes the handling of the camera very smooth. Along with a very cinematic built-in look to it, the picture, the experience, they just hit different than most mirrorless and DSLRs. And the technical aspects such as battery life, data consumption are typically very strong, making these very reliable cameras to use. Plus, I don't know, they just look cooler. I think you look cooler walking down the street shooting with this camera as opposed to this camera. In terms of the C200 specifically, its build is solid, durable, but also lightweight, making it a breeze to handle in long shooting sessions. But it's also perfect for withstanding the demands of a professional production environment. The one challenge with cinema cameras, and especially Canon cinema cameras, is they're just too expensive. But for the C200, that's no longer the case. In terms of its specs, it's an EF mount cinema camera that shoots up to 4K 60 frames per second in 2 different internal formats, 8-bit H.264 and then 12-bit RAW. Yeah, I know, that's drastic. But in my experience, these formats actually work really well. The 8-bit H.264 is actually really powerful, even though it's a compressed format. You really don't realize it, and the color grades beautifully. And just like most Canon C-Log, it captures very accurate skin tones and very nice skin tones. So for a lot of online content, the 8-bit footage works great, and the files are super easy to work with. And now in terms of the RAW, it's actually pretty easy to work with too. It's shot in a format called Cinema Raw Lite, so the files are not as compressed as other RAW formats from other cameras. Now, of course, this footage comes with significantly larger data size, so make sure you have the hard drive space for it. I think you'll probably be fine with the 8-bit for most video work, but the RAW is definitely worth it for some of those high-budget projects. Another standout of the C200 specifically is its low light performance. The camera performs especially well in low light conditions, producing clean, noise-free images at very high ISO settings. This is huge for filmmakers who often work challenging lighting situations. So what type of work is this camera good for? Honestly, pretty much everything. One really great use for it is weddings. To have a slightly compressed 4K output is great for those longer shooting times. And all of the built-in features I mentioned before help make your day less stressful. Honestly, shooting weddings with this camera is a breeze. And with its low light capabilities, you don't have to worry about delivering grainy video to your clients. For online work too, such as vlogging or studio setups, this camera just works great for it all. Its ease of use, its simple file settings, and again with the built-in XLR ports, you have a simple audio setup. That especially works great for commercials, documentary, films. For projects that need that extra quality, you have that option built in. And it's relatively easy to use, as long as you have the data storage for it, which you should for those type of projects. Now, of course, every camera has their drawbacks, and while there's not that many for this camera, the biggest overall complaint is actually the recording format. It really would have been nice to have some sort of alternative that is not the 8-bit MP4 or the 12-bit RAW, maybe like a 10-bit ProRes or something like that. I'm sure many people would have appreciated a third option. I know I would. So when people are looking to buy their first cinema camera, it's always a hard pick, because many of them are a price that doesn't back up its specs. And there's so many mirrorless cameras out there that can output just as much or even more than they can at a lower price. But now, I would even hesitate to suggest to pick up a C200, and it's definitely a purchase I'm considering myself. What do you think? Have you used this camera? Are you thinking of picking one up? If you're serious about filmmaking, I would definitely suggest trying out a cinema camera. It honestly will change the whole experience for you. I know it definitely did for me. But as always, we live in a world now where good video specs are not hard to come by from any camera, honestly. So as long as you're learning how to shoot well, thinking creatively, and telling a good story, that's all that matters in the end. So if that's the creator that you want to be, definitely subscribe and we'll tackle this wonderful world of filmmaking together.